The morning after, a mother's story. The phone call came at 6:47 a.m. on what should have been the happiest day of my life. I was sitting in my empty kitchen, still in my pajamas, staring at the mother-of-the-groom dress hanging on my bedroom door like a ghost of dreams that would never come true. The blue silk caught the morning light streaming through my window, the same window where I used to watch my son Marcus play in the backyard when he was 7, building elaborate fortresses out of cardboard boxes and declaring himself king of the universe. "Mom?" His voice was broken, raw, like he'd been crying for hours. "Marcus? Honey, what's wrong?" "The wedding's off." 3 words. 27 years of my life, and it came down to 3 words. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt relief. Instead, all I felt was the familiar ache of wanting to protect my boy from a world that kept finding new ways to hurt him. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered, closing my eyes. "I'm so sorry." "Mom, God, you were right. You were right about everything, and I was such an ass to you. And now, stop." My voice was firmer than I felt. "Don't do that to yourself. Come home." There was a pause. "Can I? After everything I said to you? After what I let her do?" My heart broke all over again. "Marcus James Thompson, you are my son. This door has never been closed to you, and it never will be. Come home. Let me tell you how we got here. Let me tell you about the woman who stole my son and nearly destroyed both our lives in the process. Let me tell you about Stephanie." Marcus met her 18 months ago at some corporate networking event downtown. He came home that night glowing, talking about this incredible woman who was smart and beautiful and sophisticated. She worked in marketing for a tech startup, drove a BMW, and wore designer clothes that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I was happy for him. God help me, I was genuinely happy. My son had always been shy with women, throwing himself into his studies and then his career as a software engineer. At 27, he'd only had 2 serious relationships, both with sweet, down-to-earth girls who treated him well. But Stephanie was different. Stephanie was glamorous. The first red flag should have been when she didn't want to meet me. 3 months into their relationship, Marcus kept making excuses. "She's busy with this big project at work," or "she's traveling for business," or my personal favorite, "She wants everything to be perfect when she meets you, Mom. You're so important to me, and she's nervous." When I finally did meet Stephanie, it was at an upscale restaurant downtown. Her choice, naturally. She was stunning in that polished, intimidating way of women who've never had to choose between groceries and gas money. Blonde hair and a perfect chignon, makeup that probably took an hour to apply, a cream-colored dress that screamed expensive. "Mrs. Thompson?" she said, extending a manicured hand. Not a hug, not a warm greeting, a handshake like I was a business associate. "Please, call me Linda." She smiled, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "Of course, Marcus has told me so much about you." Funny thing was, he told me almost nothing about her. Every time I asked about her family, her background, her interests beyond work, he'd give vague answers. "She's private," he'd say. "She doesn't like talking about personal stuff." That dinner was excruciating. Stephanie ordered the most expensive item on the menu and barely touched it. She answered my questions with polite but distant responses, constantly checking her phone. When I mentioned that I'd raised Marcus alone after his father left, she said, "That must have been difficult," in the tone you'd use to comment on bad weather. But Marcus was smitten. He hung on every word, laughed too hard at her lukewarm jokes, and kept looking at her like she might disappear if he blinked. I drove home that night with a knot in my stomach, trying to tell myself I was being overprotective. Maybe she was just nervous. Maybe she needed time to warm up. Maybe I was the problem, the overbearing mother who couldn't accept that my son was growing up. The engagement period was a masterclass in being slowly frozen out of my own son's life. Stephanie took control of every aspect of the wedding planning with military precision. The venue, a country club I couldn't pronounce the name of, the caterer, someone who'd worked celebrity weddings, the photographer, whose portfolio looked like a fashion magazine,
The flowers, imported from somewhere exotic, every detail was decided without any input from me.
"Don't worry about it, Mom," Marcus would say when I asked about helping. "Stephanie has it handled. She's really good at this stuff." When I offered to contribute financially, I'd been saving for years, knowing this day would come, Stephanie politely declined. "That's so sweet of you to offer, Linda, but Marcus and I want to handle everything ourselves. We don't want to burden anyone." Burden, like my desire to help celebrate my only child's wedding, was an inconvenience. The guest list was another slap in the face. 200 people, and I knew maybe 20 of them. The rest were Stephanie's friends, her coworkers, her extended family. When I asked Marcus if we could invite some of our neighbors, people who'd watched him grow up, who'd been there for us during the hard years, he looked uncomfortable. "The venue has limited capacity, Mom. We had to make some tough choices. But somehow, there was room for Stephanie's yoga instructor and her dresser." I bit my tongue. I smiled. I showed up to dress fittings and cake tastings where my opinion was politely requested and then politely ignored. I watched my son become a stranger, trading his jeans and flannel shirts for expensive suits, his beer and pizza nights for wine tastings and gallery openings. She's helping him grow, I told myself. She's exposing him to new things. But the Marcus I'd raised, the one who spent Saturday mornings fixing bikes for neighborhood kids, who couldn't pass a homeless person without giving them whatever cash he had in his wallet, who called me every Sunday just to chat, that Marcus was disappearing. The breaking point came 3 weeks before the wedding. I was at the grocery store when I ran into Mrs. Chen, Marcus's kindergarten teacher. She'd kept in touch over the years, always asking about him with genuine warmth. "Linda, how are you, dear? I heard about Marcus's wedding. You must be so excited." "I am," I said, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice. "It's going to be beautiful." "I was a little surprised I didn't get an invitation," she said carefully. "I know he's all grown up now, but I always hoped I'd get to see that boy get married. I still have the Mother's Day card he made me in first grade because you couldn't make it to the school celebration. You were working double shifts at the diner, remember?" I remembered. I remembered everything about those years when it was just Marcus and me against the world, when teachers like Mrs. Chen became surrogate family because we didn't have anyone else. "I'm sure it was just an oversight," I said weakly. "The guest list got complicated." She smiled, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. "Of course. Well, please give him my congratulations." That night, I called Marcus. "Honey, I ran into Mrs. Chen today." "Oh, yeah. How is she?" She mentioned not getting a wedding invitation. There was a long pause. "Mom, we talked about this. The venue has limited space. Marcus, this woman taught you to read. She stayed after school to help you with math when you were struggling. She came to your high school graduation." "I know, okay, I feel bad about it. But Stephanie says we can't invite every person from my past or we'll never fit everyone in." Every person from his past? His childhood was something to be ashamed of. "What about the Hendersons? They watched you when I had to work late. Tom taught you to change a tire." "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder than it has to be? These people love you, Marcus. They've been part of our family for years. Our family? His voice got sharp. "Mom, I'm starting my own family now. Stephanie and I were building something new. We can't be tied down by every obligation from the past." Obligation. That's what I'd become. What we'd all become. I should have seen the final blow coming, but somehow I didn't. Maybe I was naive. Maybe I was in denial. Maybe I just loved my son too much to believe he'd let someone erase me completely. It was the night before the wedding. I was at home doing a final press of my dress when the doorbell rang. I expected to see Marcus, maybe coming by for one of our traditional heart-to-hearts before big events. Instead, I opened the door to find Stephanie. She looked immaculate as always, wearing a white silk robe over what I assumed was expensive lingerie, her bachelorette party outfit probably. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled in loose waves. She looked like she was posing for a magazine spread about modern brides. "Stephanie, what a surprise. Is everything okay?" She smiled that cold smile I'd come to know so well. "Hi, Linda. Can I come in? We need to talk." I stepped aside, confusion prickling at the back of my neck. "Of course. Can I get you something to drink? Coffee? Tea?" "No, thank you. This won't take long." We sat in my living room, the same room where Marcus had done homework at my coffee table, where we'd watched countless Disney movies curled up on the couch, where he'd told me about his first heartbreak and his first job and his dreams for the future. Stephanie perched on the edge of my armchair like she was afraid of contamination. She looked around the room with barely concealed distaste, at the family photos covering every surface, at the throw pillows I'd sewn myself, at the bookshelf full of paperbacks and Marcus's old trophies from Little League. "Linda," she began, her voice saccharine, "I want to start by saying how much I appreciate everything you've done for Marcus over the years. Raising him alone couldn't have been easy." I waited, sensing the but coming. "But as he's gotten older, as he's grown and evolved, I think we both know he's outgrown certain aspects of his past." "I'm not sure I follow." Her smile sharpened. "Tomorrow is about Marcus and me starting fresh, building a life that reflects who we are now, not who we used to be. And frankly, I think having you there might send the wrong message to our friends and colleagues." The room went silent, except for the ticking of the clock on my mantle, the same clock that had counted down Marcus's childhood, marking bedtimes and homework hours and quiet Sunday mornings. "What exactly are you saying, Stephanie?" "I'm saying that perhaps it would be best if you didn't attend the wedding tomorrow." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs, felt the room tilt sideways. "You're asking me not to come to my son's wedding. I'm asking you to think about what's best for Marcus. He's worked so hard to build a new life, to become someone successful and sophisticated. Having his mother there, a single woman who raised him in poverty, who works as a..." She paused, letting her eyes drift over my modest living room again. "Well, who works in retail. It might make things awkward for him with his new social circle. I worked at a department store, had for 15 years, ever since Marcus started middle school, and I could finally hold down a daytime job instead of working nights at the diner. It was honest work, work that had put food on our table and clothes on his back and eventually helped pay for his college tuition." "Does Marcus know you're here?" I asked quietly. "Marcus wants me to handle this delicately. He loves you, of course, but he understands that this is about our future together. Our children won't need to know about all of this." She gestured vaguely around the room. "We'll create our own family traditions." I stared at this woman, this stranger who'd slithered into our lives and was now trying to erase 27 years of love and sacrifice and joy. "Get out," I said softly. "Linda, get out of my house." My voice was stronger now. "Get out and don't ever speak to me like this again." She stood, smoothing her robe. "I hope you'll think about what I've said, for Marcus's sake. I've thought about it, and I think you're a manipulative, cruel woman who doesn't deserve my son. But apparently that's his choice to make." She paused at the door. "You know, Linda, this could go one of two ways. You can bow out gracefully, and maybe someday Marcus and I will include you in family gatherings, quietly, appropriately. Or you can make a scene, show up where you're not wanted, and guarantee that you will never be part of his life again." After she left, I sat in my living room for hours, surrounded by photos of Marcus at every stage of his life. Marcus at 3, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a painting he had made for me. Marcus at 10, serious and proud in his Little League uniform. Marcus at 18, cap and gown, throwing his arms around me after graduation. Every photo told the story of us, just us, facing the world together. I picked up my phone a dozen times to call him, to tell him what his fiancée had said, to fight for my place at his wedding. But every time I heard his voice from recent conversations, "Stephanie and I want to handle everything ourselves. We can't be tied down by every obligation from the past. I'm starting my own family now." Maybe she was right. Maybe I was holding him back. At 2 a.m., I hung my mother-of-the-groom dress back in the closet and resigned myself to the most painful decision of my life. I would not attend my only child's wedding. The next morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. Old habits from years of early shifts. The house was too quiet, too empty. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, trying to imagine what was happening across town. Marcus would be getting ready, probably nervous and excited. Stephanie would be surrounded by bridesmaids and photographers, transforming herself into a princess for the day. And I would be here, alone, trying not to think about how I should have been there to straighten his tie one last time, to whisper, "I love you," before he walked down the aisle. The phone call came at 6:47 a.m. After I hung up with Marcus, I sat in the growing daylight and waited. An hour later, I heard his key in my front door. He'd kept it all these years, even though Stephanie had probably told him to give it back. He looked terrible. His tuxedo was wrinkled, his hair messy, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. But he looked like my son again for the first time in months. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke on the word. I opened my arms, and he fell into them like he was 5 years old again, crying into my shoulder while I stroked his hair. "I'm so sorry," he sobbed. "I'm so fucking sorry for everything." "Language," I said automatically, and he laughed through his tears. "Even now you're correcting my language. It's my job." We sat on my couch, the same couch where I'd held him through nightmares and heartbreaks and disappointments. He told me everything. How Stephanie's maid of honor had approached him at the bachelor party 3 days earlier, drunk and guilty and unable to keep this secret any longer. How she'd shown him photos on her phone, photos of Stephanie with another man, taken just weeks ago. Not just any man, but her ex-boyfriend, the one she'd claimed to have broken up with months before meeting Marcus. How he'd confronted Stephanie that morning, and she'd laughed. Actually laughed. She said I was naive if I thought she was going to be faithful to someone like me, someone boring, someone beneath her social class. She said the marriage was about financial security and social status, and I should be grateful she was willing to settle. My heart broke for him, but part of me felt a savage satisfaction. I'd known, somewhere deep down, I'd known she wasn't who she pretended to be. She said, Marcus's voice got very quiet. She said you came to see her last night, that you begged her not to marry me because you were jealous of losing your meal ticket. I went very still. Is that what you believed? For about 5 minutes, yeah. I was so angry, Mom. I thought you were trying to sabotage my happiness out of spite. He looked up at me, eyes full of shame, but then I started thinking about it. Really thinking. And I realized that in almost 30 years, you've never once put your own needs before mine, even when you should have. Marcus, no, let me finish. I thought about how you worked 2 jobs to keep me in decent clothes so kids wouldn't make fun of me. How you went without so I could have a computer for school. How you never dated seriously because you said no man was worth the risk of someone hurting me. His voice cracked. I thought about how you've been nothing but kind to Stephanie, even though she's treated you like shit from day one. And I realized that if you had come to her, it would have been to try to protect me, not to hurt me. I held him tighter, so I went to her house this morning to call off the wedding. That's when she told me the truth about what she really said to you. She was proud of it, Mom. She bragged about how she'd handled you, how she'd convinced you to stay away without me ever having to deal with the drama. The fury in his voice was sharp enough to cut glass. She said you were an embarrassment, that you weren't good enough to be seen at her wedding, that our whole life together, our history, our struggles, our love, was something to be ashamed of. He pulled back to look at me. And you know what the worst part is? You believed her enough to stay away. Marcus, you were going to miss my wedding, the most important day of my life, because you thought it was what I wanted. Because you've spent so many years putting my happiness first that you forgot you matter too. I couldn't speak around the lump in my throat. I love you, Mom. I love the woman who taught me that character matters more than money, that kindness matters more than status, that family isn't about blood or marriage certificates,
It's about showing up for each other no matter what. He took my hands. I'm sorry it took me so long to remember who raised me. I'm sorry I let her make me forget what really matters. We spent that day together, just the two of us. We ordered Chinese takeout and watched old movies the way we used to when he was sick or sad or just needed comfort. He told me about work, about his friends, about the life he'd been living that I'd been shut out of for months. He said, I want to start over. I want to remember who I am, who we are together. Will you help me? Always, I said. That's what mothers do. 2 days later, the story hit social media. Someone, probably one of the wedding guests, had posted about the dramatic wedding cancellation, complete with photos of the empty reception hall and speculation about what had gone wrong. Within hours, it had blown up into a full-scale internet drama. Stephanie, in a move that surprised no one who really knew her, tried to control the narrative. She posted a long, victim-laden story on Instagram about how she'd been betrayed by someone she trusted and how toxic family dynamics had destroyed her perfect day.
She painted herself as the wounded party and me as the jealous, interfering mother who couldn't let go of her son. Marcus was having none of it. He posted his own response, a clear, detailed account of what had really happened. He included screenshots of text messages, photos that contradicted her timeline, and testimony from friends who'd witnessed her behavior. But more than that, he included photos of us, him and me throughout the years, smiling and happy, and obviously devoted to each other. This is my mother, he wrote. She raised me alone from the time I was 2 years old when my father abandoned us. She worked multiple jobs to keep us afloat, often going without so I could have what I needed. She taught me to be kind, honest, and loyal. She taught me to value people for who they are, not what they have. She taught me that love means sacrifice, that family means showing up, and that integrity matters more than image. The woman I was about to marry mocked those values. She told me I should be ashamed of my mother, of my upbringing, of the life that made me who I am. She tried to convince me that success means abandoning the people who built you up, that sophistication means looking down on others, that love is conditional on status and money. She was wrong about all of it, and she was especially wrong about my mother, who was the strongest, most selfless, most loving person I know. I'm proud to be her son. I'm proud of where I came from, and I'm grateful every day for the woman who showed me what unconditional love really looks like. The post went viral. Thousands of people shared their own stories of family loyalty, of mothers who'd sacrificed everything, of the importance of remembering where you came from. The comments section became a tribute to single mothers everywhere, with people posting photos and stories of the women who'd raised them against all odds. But the vindication that mattered most came from Marcus himself, who seemed to rediscover his joy in the simple things we'd always shared. He started coming over for Sunday dinners again. He brought me flowers on random Tuesdays. He fixed the squeaky hinge on my front door and helped me plant a new garden in the backyard. Most importantly, he started talking about the future again, not in terms of status or image, but in terms of meaning and connection. 6 months later, Marcus met Sarah. She was nothing like Stephanie. Sarah was a teacher at the local elementary school, with dirt under her fingernails from her classroom garden and ink stains on her fingers from grading papers. She drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, bought her clothes at Target, and thought a fancy dinner was anything that didn't come from a drive-through window. She was also kind, funny, intelligent, and so clearly in love with my son that it made my heart ache with happiness. The first time Marcus brought her to Sunday dinner, she insisted on helping in the kitchen. While we cooked together, she told me stories about her students, asked about my job at the store, and genuinely listened to my answers. Marcus talks about you constantly, she said, as we chopped vegetables. He's so proud of you. He told me about how you worked 3 jobs to put him through college, how you never missed a single school event, how you taught him to change a tire and balance a checkbook, and treat people with respect. He's a good boy. He always has been. He said you used to read to him every night, even when you were exhausted from work, that you'd make up voices for all the characters and act out the scenes.
I smiled, remembering. He loved stories. Still does, I think. He does. He reads to my class sometimes when I need a guest reader. The kids adore him. She paused. He told me about Stephanie, about what happened. I tensed, waiting for judgment or awkward sympathy. Instead, she said, I can't imagine trying to separate a mother and son like that. Family is everything to me. My parents divorced when I was young, and my mom raised me and my brother alone too. I know what that bond looks like, what it means.
She understood. Without explanation or justification, she understood. Marcus is lucky to have you, she continued. And if things work out between us, I hope you'll know that I would never try to come between you two. I'd want to add to your family, not take away from it. I had to turn away to hide my tears. They got engaged on a Tuesday in March, in my backyard under the cherry tree that had been there since Marcus was small. No fancy restaurant, no elaborate proposal story for social media, just Marcus, nervous and happy, getting down on one knee while Sarah laughed and cried and said yes before he'd even finished asking. The ring was simple, not because he couldn't afford better, but because Sarah had specifically asked for something modest. I want to be able to wear it while gardening, she told him. The wedding planning was everything the first one hadn't been. Sarah included me in every decision, asking for my opinions and actually listening to them. When I offered to contribute financially, she hugged me and said, we'd be honored. The guest list was full of people who mattered, teachers and neighbors and friends from every era of Marcus's life. Mrs. Jen got the first invitation. The Hendersons got a place of honor in the front row. Sarah's students made decorations and Marcus's coworkers volunteered to help with setup. It wasn't fancy. The venue was the community center where Marcus had played basketball as a kid. The flowers came from the grocery store, arranged by Sarah's aunt, who had a talent for making beautiful things from simple materials. The photographer was a friend of a friend who charged half his usual rate because he believed in love. But it was perfect. Every detail reflected who they really were, what they really valued. Most importantly, it was full of love. Real love, the kind that includes rather than excludes, that builds up rather than tears down, that celebrates the past while looking forward to the future. As I watched Marcus and Sarah exchange vows they'd written themselves, vows about partnership and respect and choosing each other every day, I thought about the difference between the two women who'd wanted to marry my son. Stephanie had seen Marcus as a project to be improved, a stepping stone to the life she wanted. She tried to erase his history, to make him ashamed of where he came from. Sarah saw him as he was, flaws and strengths, past and potential, and loved all of it. She didn't want to change him. She wanted to grow alongside him. That night, after the last dance and the final goodbye, Marcus found me in the kitchen of the community center, washing dishes alongside Sarah's mother. "Mom," he said, putting his arms around me from behind the way he had when he was little. "Thank you." "For what, sweetheart?" "For raising me to know the difference between love and manipulation, for showing me what it means to put family first, for never giving up on me, even when I was too stupid to see what was right in front of me." I turned in his arms, this man who would always be my little boy, for being the kind of mother who raised the kind of man Sarah wanted to marry. She told me tonight that she fell in love with me because I was kind to waitstaff and remembered her students' names and called my mom every Sunday. She said those things told her everything she needed to know about my character. She's a smart woman. She is. And she wants kids someday. Kids who'll have the most amazing grandmother in the world. I started crying then, thinking about future Sunday dinners with grandchildren around my table, about bedtime stories and scraped knees and all the ordinary miracles that make a family. The weeks following the canceled wedding were a complicated mix of healing and reckoning. While Marcus and I rebuilt our relationship, the fallout from Stephanie's behavior continued to ripple through both our lives in unexpected ways. I'll never forget the day Marcus's best friend, Jake, called me directly, something he'd never done in all the years I'd known him. "Mrs. Thompson? It's Jake. I hope it's okay that I'm calling you." "Of course, honey. Is everything all right?"
There was a long pause. I need to apologize to you, and I need to tell you something that I should have told Marcus months ago.
Jake had been Marcus's roommate in college, his best man at the wedding that never happened, and one of the few people who'd tried to maintain a friendship with both Marcus and me during the Stephanie years. He'd always been a good kid, the kind who helped me carry groceries when he visited, who remembered my birthday, who treated me with the easy affection of a son. But even Jake had been swept up in Stephanie's carefully constructed narrative about upgrading Marcus's life. "She told me you were having trouble letting go," he said quietly. "She said you were calling Marcus constantly, showing up uninvited, making his life difficult. She made it sound like you were being clingy, possessive." My heart sank. I'd wondered why Jake had become so distant, why he'd stopped including me in group conversations when I joined them for dinner or events. "I believed her," he continued, shame heavy in his voice. "I even talked to Marcus about it, told him maybe he needed to set boundaries with you. I thought I was helping him become more independent." The betrayal was breathtaking in its completeness. Stephanie hadn't just isolated Marcus from me, she'd turned his closest friends against me too, using them as unwitting accomplices in her campaign to erase me from his life. But the night before the wedding, when everything fell apart, Marcus told me what really happened, how she'd been manipulating all of us, lying about your behavior, making you seem like the problem when you were just trying to love your son. Jake's voice cracked. "Mrs. Thompson, I am so sorry. I should have trusted what I knew about you instead of believing someone I barely knew. I should have seen through her lies. Jake, sweetheart. No, please let me finish. You were nothing but kind to me for 4 years in college. You sent me care packages during finals. You invited me for Thanksgiving when I couldn't afford to fly home. You drove 6 hours to our graduation because Marcus wanted you there. You never did anything to suggest you were anything other than a loving mother who wanted the best for her son. And I let a stranger convince me otherwise." I was crying by then, not just from the apology, but from understanding how completely Stephanie had poisoned the well. How many other people had she turned against me with her carefully crafted lies? "The worst part," he continued, "is that I encouraged Marcus to distance himself from you. I told him that successful people sometimes had to make hard choices about family relationships. I said maybe Stephanie was right, that you represented a part of his past he needed to outgrow." The words hit me like physical blows. To know that people I'd loved and trusted had been working against me, even with the best of intentions, was almost unbearable. But watching him these past few weeks, seeing him come back to himself, I realized how wrong I was. The Marcus I knew in college, the one who was kind and thoughtful and genuinely happy, that guy disappeared while he was with Stephanie. He became someone harder, colder, more concerned with image than substance. I thought it was growth, but it was actually the opposite. After we hung up, I sat in my living room thinking about the insidious nature of Stephanie's manipulation. She hadn't just attacked our relationship directly, she'd recruited others to do it for her, making Marcus feel like everyone in his life was telling him the same thing, that I was the problem. How do you fight an enemy who convinces your allies to fight against you? The answer came in the form of Mrs. Henderson calling me a few days later. "Linda, dear, I hope you don't mind me reaching out. Tom and I have been so worried about you." The Hendersons had been our neighbors for over 20 years. Tom had taught Marcus to change oil and throw a curveball. Nancy had been my emergency contact for school pickups when I couldn't leave work. They'd watched Marcus grow up, celebrated his successes, worried about his future right alongside me. "We heard about the wedding being called off," Nancy continued, "and frankly, we're relieved." "You are?" "Oh, honey, yes. That girl was trouble from the start. Did you know she actually came to our house about a month ago?" My blood went cold. "She did?" "She said she wanted to introduce herself properly since we were such important parts of Marcus's past. But the whole conversation was really about pumping us for embarrassing stories about him." She kept asking about times he'd gotten in trouble, about your financial struggles, about whether he'd ever been popular with girls. The predatory nature of it made me sick. Stephanie had been building a dossier of ammunition to use against Marcus and me. When we didn't give her what she wanted, because honestly, Linda, that boy has never been anything but a credit to you, she got nasty. Started talking about how Marcus was evolving beyond his origins and how people from his past might not fit in his new life. Nancy paused, and I could hear her gathering courage for what came next. She specifically asked us not to make things awkward by expecting to maintain our relationship with Marcus after the wedding. She said it would be better for everyone if we just faded away. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Stephanie hadn't just been isolating Marcus from me. She'd been systematically severing all his connections to his past, anyone who might remind him of who he really was. The thing is, Nancy continued, we were actually considering it. She made it sound like it was what Marcus wanted, that staying in his life would somehow hurt his chances for success. Tom and I spent weeks debating whether we should distance ourselves. Why didn't you? Because of something that happened about 2 weeks before the wedding. Marcus came over to borrow Tom's ladder. He was hanging something in his apartment. While he was here, he saw our old photo albums on the coffee table. You know, the ones from the neighborhood barbecues and block parties over the years? I remembered those gatherings. Some of my happiest memories were from the Hendersons' backyard, watching Marcus play with the other kids while the adults shared potluck dinners and easy conversation. He spent an hour looking through those albums, Linda. An hour. He kept pointing to pictures and telling us stories about those days, how you organized the annual Easter egg hunt, how Tom taught him to grill, how I helped him with his science fair project about plant growth. Nancy's voice got soft with emotion. He looked so happy looking at those photos. So himself. But then his phone rang. It was Stephanie. And it was like watching a light switch flip off. His whole demeanor changed. He became formal, distant. He handed the album back and said he had to go, like he was embarrassed to have been caught reminiscing. That's when Tom and I realized that whatever Stephanie was telling us about Marcus wanting distance from his past, it wasn't true. The boy we saw looking at those photos was homesick for his own life. After that conversation, I started getting calls from other people in Marcus's life. His high school guidance counselor, who'd helped him apply for college scholarships. His old boss from the computer repair shop where he'd worked summers during college. Even Mrs. Chen, his kindergarten teacher. The story was always the same. Stephanie had reached out to them ostensibly to learn more about Marcus's background, but really to assess whether they posed a threat to her narrative of his transformation. When they proved unwilling to disparage him or me, she'd suggested they might want to give him space to grow by stepping back from his life. Some had complied, thinking they were doing what was best for Marcus. Others had been hurt and confused by the sudden distance. All of them had been manipulated into believing that their love for Marcus was somehow holding him back. The scope of her campaign was breathtaking. She'd spent months systematically dismantling the network of relationships that had shaped and supported Marcus throughout his life, replacing them with her own shallow, status-conscious acquaintances. But here's what she hadn't counted on. Real love doesn't just disappear because someone tells you it should. The people who truly cared about Marcus, who'd invested years in his well-being and happiness, were still there, waiting for him to come home. The process of rebuilding those relationships became a family affair. Marcus spent weeks reaching out to people he'd lost contact with, apologizing for his distance, explaining what had happened. Most were understanding, even relieved to learn the truth. Some needed time to trust that the changes were real and lasting. I watched my son navigate this delicate work with a humility and grace that made me proud. He didn't make excuses or blame everything on Stephanie. He took responsibility for his choices, even when those choices had been influenced by manipulation. I should have trusted my instincts, he told Mrs. Chen when he called to apologize for not inviting her to the wedding. You've known me since I was 5 years old. If you thought Stephanie was wrong for me, I should have listened. Oh, sweetheart, she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice through the speakerphone. I never said she was wrong for you.
I just worried that she didn't seem to appreciate who you already were. These conversations were healing for all of us, but they also revealed the true extent of the damage Stephanie had done. She'd nearly succeeded in convincing Marcus to abandon everyone who had ever loved him unconditionally, in favor of people who only valued him for what he could do for them. The most difficult conversation was with his dad. Marcus's dad had left when Marcus was 2, claiming he wasn't ready for the responsibility of fatherhood. Over the years, he'd made sporadic attempts at contact, birthday cards that arrived late, promised visits that never materialized, child support payments that came in irregular bursts of guilt. I'd never badmouthed him to Marcus, but I'd also never encouraged a relationship that seemed to cause more pain than joy. Marcus had stopped expecting anything from his father years ago, and we'd both been okay with that.
But during his relationship with Stephanie, Marcus had started reaching out to his father more frequently. He'd even invited him to the wedding, a decision that had surprised and hurt me, though I'd tried not to show it. She kept telling me that successful men had relationships with their fathers, Marcus explained when we talked about it, that my anger toward him was holding me back professionally and personally. She said I needed to heal that wound if I wanted to move forward in life. There was nothing wrong with Marcus wanting to reconcile with his father, but the timing and motivation troubled me. It seemed less about genuine healing and more about checking boxes on Stephanie's list of what a sophisticated man should be. Did you want a relationship with him, or did you think you should want one? Marcus was quiet for a long time. I honestly don't know anymore. She made me question everything I felt about everyone. She convinced me that my instincts were wrong, that my judgments were clouded by my limited background. This, I realized, was the most insidious part of what Stephanie had done. She hadn't just isolated Marcus from the people who loved him, she'd made him doubt his own ability to discern love from manipulation, authenticity from performance. What does your gut tell you now? I asked. That my father is exactly who he's always been. Someone who shows up when it's convenient and disappears when it's not. Someone who wants the benefits of being called dad without doing any of the work of being a father. And how do you feel about that? Sad, but not angry anymore. And not guilty for not wanting more from him than he's capable of giving. It was a mature, healthy perspective, one that came from trusting his own judgment, rather than letting someone else tell him what he should feel. The healing process wasn't just about relationships, though. It was also about Marcus rediscovering who he was beneath all the changes Stephanie had pushed him to make. I watched him gradually shed the expensive clothes that had never quite fit his personality, returning to the jeans and flannel shirts that made him comfortable. He canceled his membership at the pretentious downtown gym Stephanie had insisted he join and went back to running in the park where he'd gone since high school. He started reading fiction again, science fiction and fantasy novels that Stephanie had mocked as juvenile. He picked up his guitar, which had been gathering dust in his closet for months. He began cooking again, experimenting with recipes and inviting friends over for casual dinners instead of expensive restaurant meals. Most importantly, he started laughing again. Really laughing, not the polite chuckles that had become his default during the Stephanie era. His sense of humor, goofy, self-deprecating, sometimes silly, came back gradually, like a plant recovering from a long drought. I'd forgotten how exhausting it was, he told me one Sunday as we worked in my garden together, trying to be someone else all the time, monitoring every word, every reaction, every choice to make sure it fit the image she wanted. That's not love, I said, pulling weeds with more force than necessary. That's performance art. Yeah, and I was a terrible actor. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, our hands dirty with soil, the sun warm on our backs. It was one of those perfect, ordinary moments that Stephanie would have dismissed as beneath them, but that I treasured as sacred. Mom, Marcus said, can I ask you something? Always. Can you ask me something? How did you know? About her, I mean. What was it that made you so sure she was wrong for me? I sat back on my heels, considering the question. It wasn't any one thing. It was more like,
She wanted you to be ashamed of the things I was most proud of. What do you mean? Your kindness, your loyalty, your ability to find joy in simple things, the way you treated service workers with respect, how you remembered people's names, how you'd rather spend a Saturday helping a neighbor than networking at some fancy event. I looked at him, this man I'd raised to be good more than successful. She saw those qualities as weaknesses to be corrected, not strengths to be celebrated. And that bothered you. It terrified me, because those qualities, that's who you are at your core. If someone wants you to hide the best parts of yourself, what do they actually love about you? He nodded slowly. Sarah says she fell in love with me because I helped an old man change his tire in a grocery store parking lot. She was in the car behind us, watching, and she said she knew immediately that I was someone she wanted to know. Smart woman. Stephanie would have been mortified. She would have said it made me look like a blue-collar nobody. And what do you think it made you look like? Like someone my mother raised right. It was around this time that I started hearing from other mothers. Word had spread through social media, through mutual friends, through the invisible network of women who recognize each other's struggles about what had happened with Marcus and Stephanie. I began getting calls and messages from mothers who'd experienced similar situations, women whose children had been manipulated into cutting ties with family, who'd watched helplessly as toxic partners isolated their sons and daughters from everyone who truly loved them. One woman, Patricia, called me in tears. Her daughter had been married for 2 years to a man who'd convinced her that her family was holding her back. She hadn't spoken to Patricia in 8 months. I keep thinking there must be something I did wrong, Patricia sobbed. Some way I failed her that made her choose him over us. You didn't fail her, I said firmly. Someone is working very hard to make her believe that choosing him means rejecting you, but that's not how love works. How do I get her back? You don't give up. You stay available. You make it clear that the door is always open, that your love isn't conditional on her choices, and you wait for her to remember who she really is. These conversations broke my heart, but they also gave me purpose. I started to understand that what had happened to Marcus and me wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern, a specific type of abuse that targets the bonds between family members. I began volunteering with a local support group for families dealing with manipulation and emotional abuse. I shared my story, the painful parts and the hopeful ending, with other parents who were living through their own versions of my nightmare. The hardest part, I told one group, is accepting that love sometimes means stepping back and letting your child make their own mistakes. But you have to trust that the foundation you built, all those years of teaching them right from wrong, of showing them what healthy love looks like, that foundation is still there, even when it's buried under someone else's lies. What if they never come back? Asked a father whose son had cut off all contact 3 years earlier. Then you love them anyway, from a distance, quietly, without expecting anything in return, because that's what parents do. It wasn't the answer he wanted to hear, but it was the truth I'd learned. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to give up on someone even when they've given up on you. A year after the canceled wedding, Marcus and Sarah announced their engagement. The proposal was everything the first one hadn't been: intimate, personal, meaningful. Marcus had taken Sarah to the elementary school where she taught, to the classroom where they'd first met when he'd volunteered to read to her students. He'd gotten permission from the principal to decorate the room with photos of their relationship, their first date, holidays with both families, quiet moments that told the story of two people building a life together. When Sarah arrived that morning, she found Marcus standing in the middle of her classroom, surrounded by their history, holding a ring that had belonged to my mother. I wanted to propose here because this is where I learned what it means to love someone for exactly who they are. Watching you with your students, seeing how you nurture and protect and believe in them, that's when I knew I wanted to spend my life with someone who sees the best in people and helps them find it in themselves. Sarah called me within minutes of saying yes. crying and laughing and trying to tell me everything at once. "He used your mother's ring," she kept saying. "He said he wanted our marriage to be built on the same kind of love that raised him." When Marcus had asked for the ring, my mother's simple gold band with a small diamond that had seen her through 43 years of marriage, I'd cried for an hour. Not just because he wanted to use it, but because it meant he understood the difference between real love and the counterfeit version Stephanie had offered. My mother's ring represented a love that had weathered hardships, that had grown stronger through challenges, that had chosen commitment over convenience every single day. It was exactly the kind of foundation I wanted for Marcus's marriage. The wedding planning was a joy from start to finish. Sarah included me in every decision. But more than that, she genuinely wanted my input. We spent hours looking at venues and tasting cakes and debating centerpieces, and I felt like I was gaining a daughter rather than losing a son. "I want this to feel like a celebration of family," Sarah told me as we addressed invitations. "Not just Marcus and me starting something new, but all of us coming together to support this new branch of our family tree." The guest list reflected that philosophy. Teachers and neighbors, college friends and work colleagues, family members from multiple generations. Everyone who'd played a role in shaping Marcus and Sarah into the people they'd become. Mrs. Chen was invited to be an honorary grandmother. The Hendersons were asked to do a reading during the ceremony. Jake, redeemed and grateful for forgiveness, was best man again, this time for the right reasons. Most meaningfully, Sarah's students were included in the celebration. She'd been teaching the same group for 2 years, and they'd become invested in her happiness. They made decorations for the reception, wrote poems for the ceremony, and served as junior ushers with the serious importance that only 8-year-olds can bring to such duties. "Miss Sarah's getting married," they announced to anyone who would listen, as proud as if they'd arranged the match themselves.
The wedding day itself was perfect in ways that had nothing to do with flowers or food or decorations. It was perfect because it was authentic, a true reflection of who Marcus and Sarah were, both individually and together. I'll never forget the moment when Marcus saw Sarah walking down the aisle. His face lit up with such pure joy, such uncomplicated happiness that I started crying before she'd taken 3 steps. This was what love was supposed to look like. Not anxiety about impression management or social status, but simple delight in the presence of the person you'd chosen to spend your life with. During the ceremony, they exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Marcus promised to choose kindness over cleverness, authenticity over ambition, and love over everything else that might try to come between us. Sarah promised to build a life that honors both our dreams and our families, that makes space for who we've been and who we're becoming. But the moment that broke me completely was when Marcus turned to look at me before saying his final vow. "I promise," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "to be the kind of husband my mother taught me to be, someone who shows up, who puts family first, who understands that real success is measured in love given and received." After the ceremony, during the reception, person after person came up to me with variations of the same comment. "You should be so proud of the man you raised. Marcus is exactly the kind of person you hope your own children will become. You can tell he was raised with love." These weren't empty platitudes. They were observations from people who'd watched Marcus navigate relationships, career challenges, and life decisions with integrity and kindness. They'd seen him choose compassion over convenience, loyalty over personal advancement, family over status. That night, as I watched my son dance with his new wife, surrounded by everyone who loved them, I felt a deep sense of completion. Not because my job as a mother was finished, that would never be finished, but because I'd accomplished what I'd set out to do 27 years earlier. I'd raised a good man. 3 months after the wedding, Sarah found out she was pregnant. They called me together, on speakerphone,
both of them talking over each other in their excitement to share the news. "We're having a baby," Sarah announced. "You're going to be a grandmother," Marcus added. "I know it's early, but we couldn't wait to tell you. We're just so happy and we wanted you to be the first to know." I sat down hard in my kitchen chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were telling me. A grandchild. A new generation. The continuation of our family story. "Are you okay, Mom?" Marcus asked, concerned by my silence. "I'm perfect. I'm absolutely perfect." Over the following months, I watched Sarah navigate pregnancy with the same grace and intelligence she brought to everything else. She researched everything, prepared carefully, but never lost sight of the joy and wonder of what was happening to her body. Marcus was equally amazing, attentive without being overbearing, excited without being overwhelming. He read pregnancy books, assembled furniture, and started a photo album documenting Sarah's changing silhouette and their growing anticipation. But my favorite part was watching him process the reality of becoming a father. He'd always been good with children, patient, playful, genuinely interested in their thoughts and feelings. But the prospect of having his own child seemed to unlock something deeper in him. I keep thinking about all the things I want to teach them. How to ride a bike, how to be kind to people who are different, how to stand up for what's right even when it's hard.
You'll be a wonderful father. I hope so. I keep thinking about how you did it, raising me alone, working multiple jobs, never making me feel like I was a burden or that you regretted having me. I don't know how you managed it. Love, I said simply. Love makes everything else manageable. But what if I screw up? What if I'm not patient enough, or I lose my temper, or I don't know how to help them when they're struggling? I stopped walking and turned to face him. "Marcus, do you remember when you were 8 and you broke Mrs. Henderson's window with a baseball?" "Yeah." "What did I do?" "You made me apologize and do chores to pay for the replacement." "And what did I tell you about making mistakes?" He smiled, reciting words I'd repeated throughout his childhood. "That mistakes are how we learn, as long as we take responsibility and try to do better next time. That's all any of us can do, parent or child. We show up, we do our best, we admit when we're wrong, and we keep trying to do better. You've been practicing those skills your whole life." "You really think I'll be okay?" "I think you'll be better than okay. I think you'll be the kind of father who raises children that other people's parents hope their kids will be friends with." Emma Rose Thompson was born on a Tuesday in March, during a snowstorm that shut down most of the city. Sarah's labor was long but uncomplicated, and I spent most of it in the hospital waiting room with Tom and Nancy Henderson, Sarah's parents, and a rotating cast of friends who'd come to offer support. When Marcus finally emerged from the delivery room, exhausted and euphoric, he looked exactly like he had as a little boy on Christmas morning, overwhelmed by joy he couldn't quite contain. "She's here," he announced unnecessarily, since we could all hear the crying from down the hall. "She's perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, lungs that work really, really well." I was the second person to hold Emma after Sarah's mother. Marcus placed her in my arms with the careful reverence of someone handling the most precious thing in the world. She was impossibly tiny, impossibly perfect. Dark hair like Marcus, Sarah's delicate features, and eyes that seemed to look right through me to something infinitely interesting just beyond my shoulder. "Hello, beautiful," I whispered. "I'm your grandmother. I've been waiting to meet you for a very long time." She yawned, a tiny, squeaky sound, and settled more comfortably in my arms. "I think she likes you," Sarah said from her hospital bed, tired but radiant. "I think I like her too." As I held my granddaughter, I thought about all the things I wanted to share with her. Stories about her father as a little boy, family recipes that had been passed down through generations, the importance of kindness and curiosity, and standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. I thought about the bedtime stories I would read to her,
the cookies we would bake together, the scraped knees I would kiss, and the broken hearts I would help heal. I thought about watching her discover the world, learn to walk and talk and think for herself. Most of all, I thought about how this little girl would grow up surrounded by love, not just from her parents, but from a whole network of people who'd been waiting to welcome her into the world. She would know her history, understand where she came from, feel proud of the family that had shaped her father into the man he'd become. She would never doubt that she belonged, never be asked to choose between love and loyalty, never be made to feel ashamed of the people who poured their lives into making hers possible. That night, after everyone had gone home and the hospital had settled into its quiet rhythm, I sat in the chair beside Sarah's bed while she slept, and Marcus dozed uncomfortably in the window seat. Emma was awake, alert, and seemingly fascinated by the play of light and shadow on the ceiling. "Your daddy is the best man I know," I told her softly. "He's going to teach you so many things: how to be brave when you're scared, how to be kind when other people aren't, how to find joy in ordinary moments. He's going to love you the way he's always been loved, completely, unconditionally, without reservation." She made a tiny noise that might have been agreement. "And your mama is going to show you how to be strong and smart and independent. She's going to teach you that you can be anything you want to be, that your dreams matter, that you deserve to be with people who see your worth." I adjusted the blanket around her tiny body. "But mostly, little one, you're going to grow up knowing that family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates. It's about people who choose to love you, who show up for you, who believe in you even when you don't believe in yourself. You're going to have so many people in your corner: parents and grandparents, teachers and neighbors, friends who become family." Emma's eyes started to drift closed, her breathing settling into the peaceful rhythm of sleep. "You're going to be loved, sweet girl. So incredibly loved." It's been 2 years since that phone call at 6:47 a.m. 2 years since the wedding that never happened. 2 years since I learned that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you turns out to be the best thing after all. Emma is walking now, babbling in the mysterious language of toddlers, and has developed strong opinions about everything from what shoes to wear to which books should be read at bedtime. She calls me Gamma and lights up when she sees me in a way that makes my heart feel too big for my chest. Marcus and Sarah bought a house 6 months ago, a modest 3-bedroom in a neighborhood full of young families and old trees. The guest room is officially mine whenever I want it, and Emma has claimed the playroom as her kingdom. The backyard has a swing set that Marcus installed himself, following the same meticulous approach he used for everything else in his life. Sunday dinners have evolved to include high chairs and sippy cups and the cheerful chaos that comes with a toddler at the table. Emma sits between Marcus and Sarah, conducting elaborate conversations with her stuffed animals and occasionally offering bites of her food to anyone willing to pretend enthusiasm for mashed bananas. These evenings are my favorite time of the week, not just because of the food or the conversation, but because of the feeling of wholeness they give me. 3 generations around one table, sharing stories and laughter and the simple pleasure of being together. Stephanie's name rarely comes up anymore. When it does, it's usually in the context of warning signs Marcus and Sarah share with friends who are dating. They've become advocates for trusting your instincts about potential partners, for paying attention to how someone treats the people you love, for understanding that real love includes rather than excludes. If someone asks you to choose between them and your family, Sarah told one of her teacher friends who was struggling with a controlling boyfriend, choose your family. Every time. People who love you don't make you pick sides. Marcus has grown into parenthood with the same thoughtfulness he brings to everything else. He reads parenting books, asks questions, and approaches each new challenge with patience and humor. But mostly he parents the way he was parented, with consistency, kindness, and the unshakable belief that children need to feel loved exactly as they are. "I want Emma to grow up the way I did," he told me recently, as we watched her chase butterflies in the backyard. "Knowing that home is a safe place, that family means unconditional love, that she's valued for who she is, not what she achieves." "She will," I said confidently. "Look at her parents." "You think we're doing okay?" "I think you're doing exactly what you're supposed to."